It is time to set foot on the rugged old vehicle of mystical progression, down into the depths of our consciousness with the fast-moving ghost caboose. Let's get on board because it's time to start our exploration of the intimate world of the world. We've got all the world to talk about. So if this doesn't take 3 hours, I will consider it a grand achievement. So it's going to cover a whole range of wonderful theorists, the famous, your faves, Lacan, Zizek, and of course Delia Smith, mostly known as not a theorist of the Christian Hermeticists, or neither as a kind of TV chef, but in fact the chairman or chairperson or chairwoman of Norwich City Football Club, that is. Let's be having you, boys and girls. Anything I need to say before we get started? Well, given that we're dealing with the whole of the world as represented by a group of men, and that's who I think made the original tarot, this will take quite a while, but I beg your patience. Oh, I'm not very good. I'm still getting used to having a camera like this. There we go. There she is. Before we get on, why don't we have a quick look at a beautiful deck of cards of the tarot that is probably one of the most recognizable tarot decks around, the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is, if you type in tarot on Google, you'll probably come across this style. And I've just picked out a couple of others which are rather sort of just dazzlingly beautiful one. I mean, the Rider-Waite-Smith is a masterpiece of mystical ideas collected by the theorist, I think his name's Arthur Waite, in collaboration with the artist Pamela Coleman Smith. I might have got her name wrong there, but that's the early 20th century. And I've talked nothing about this fabulous, inspiring deck. But here it is. Here's the devil as well from yesterday. But of course, we're focusing on le monde, the world, with the baton or the wand in one hand. Here's a similar representation, a predecessor to our current Marseille deck. This is the Piatnik deck. And this is one of many representations of women, in a sense, isolated and by themselves. I mean, we've got a ring around the woman here in the Piatnik deck, as well as the same here in the Marseille deck, of course. Wow, so much to say and so much to do. So the best place to start, of course, is with our friend from Chile, the guy, the filmmaker, the mystic, Alejandro Jodorowsky. Let's get started with his text. Let me turn myself down there without falling off my chair like I did earlier today. And right, let's get going. So we'll start with his chapter on the world, the summation of all of what we've been doing and all that we will do. The tarot teaches you not to consider anything in isolation. I've been afraid of doing this card, to be honest, because it's so enormous. The world is quite big, right? But we've got to start somewhere. And in a way, we've done the 5, the 15, the 10, the 20. We've dealt with a lot of these sort of big roadblocks in the numerical sequence of the tarot. Now we're doing 21. And maybe from our continuance of studying the tarot, things will make a bit more sense now that we've got the culmination really right there and steady. So before we start, of course, it might be necessary just to keep myself rather happy. This mug, by the way, in case you were wondering, I bought in the flea market here in Lisbon, Feira de Ladro, the thieves market, on the day I was told, I was with my brother Mark, on the day I was told that he was going to have his second child, Martha. So that's a lovely memory stored in this beautiful cup of morangues, or strawberries. Nestled in our own straw, in our own nests, of course, we begin the word, the rain from above, the inspiration. Let's go! 21, Le Monde, the world, total realization. How are we doing there? That looks okay. This arcanum bears the number 21, the highest numerical value of the tarot. It represents the supreme realization. Realization, creation, something put into word or put into matter. I have realized the idea, and I realize something. I've become intimate in the knowledge of something. Intimacy is everything to this card, in my view. On it, we see a woman dancing in the middle of a crown of light blue leaves with a flask, a receptive principle, in her right hand and a wand, active principle, in her left. Have a look at the raised left foot of the woman in the middle. Potentially a depiction of Venus. We get many depictions of ladies dancing in these mandolas, these almond-shaped eaves, or leaves, I guess. Also, a unconscious signal of Shiva, potentially Shiva, and the war dance, the dance of Shiva in Hindu mythology with one leg raised, the world spinning around thanks to Shiva's movements. As in the Taoist principle, Yang supports Yin and vice versa, and this is a reference to what the world is supposed to be holding. We've got the staff or the wand or the baton in her left hand, and in her right hand a flask. So receptive principles and active principles, the idea of creation right there. A blue scarf at the top behind her, so that's the lovely scarf she's wearing, passes over her body and becomes red. Although this figure is undeniably female, it is the union of principle, androgyny realized, that she suggests. So she's supposed to be also rather, I wouldn't say male, but possibly sexless. My arm aches now, so I'll put that down. Please look at the image that I have linked to in the description. It's really good if you can get the image of this card while we're going through. There's not much point just listening to me drone on and on about it. It's about you making your own mind up about it, the impressions that you are left with, of course. The final stage of the path of the major arcana, the world, is a call to be recognized in its deepest reality and to accept fullness and realization. It is also the moment when, freed from self-destruction, we begin to glimpse the suffering of the other and put ourselves in the service of humanity. So two major things going on here. There's an idea of charity, of grace potentially, of hope and help. But what really excites me, the impression left on me, is the idea of realization, the making real of something. What is defined as real is according to the person, okay? So for me, something that's real, something that I directly experience, despite it potentially being very tricky to call real, to say in rational language, oh, this thing is absolutely real. But point is, it's realization, the putting into concrete some kind of experience, the idea of creation being made or made manifest in the world. Yes, I'll come back to that. In Christian tradition, Christ, the Virgin, and the saints are sometimes depicted this way inside an oval shape. The mandola is the Italian word for almond, is both the symbol of eternity and the shape reminiscent of the female sex organ. We can attribute to this arcanum the rediscovered unity of the world in its totality. Rediscovery of the world in its totality, a return to the womb, a return to the female sex organ, and particularly to the bundle of nerves, the node of sexual experience. Men have it as, of course, a penis, or the tip, the shaft, the tip of the shaft of the penis, and in women, of course, the clitoris. So I feel a huge energetic focus on this card is the head of the woman, and the symbolic representation of what the Greeks, we think, called, and I've got some notes here, clitoris, which is a little word, a diminutive word. Possibly, we don't really know the origin of this word, of our contemporary clitoris, but possibly, and there are some wonderful ideas here, I can't say this word, Kleiein, Kleiein, meaning like a sword is sheathed in its shield or its protective cover. So something by necessarily veiled or slightly hidden in the idea of a clitoris. By the way, the more you read about this, clitoris is a much larger region than just one center, one focus. But the heart of it is these little pearls we see across the tarot, these little spheres with this sort of central energy. Kleiein also means something that is shut. There's also a word in Greek, kleis. This is at least ancient Greek. I don't know if it's contemporary Greek, but kleis meaning a key, a latch, or a hook. So we have from today the word close and slot. This potential, relation to the word clitoris as well. Shut, hidden. Of course, this might be a man's idea of what a clitoris is, and if it were up to women, there may be a completely different word. There is also a theory that it comes from another Greek word meaning little hill. So how to relate this all back to this card and to what Jodorowsky says? Well, we can attribute to this arcanum the rediscovered unity of the world in its totality. Rediscovered. Not discovered, rediscovered. All of us, in whatever form, have an experience of being covered or cloaked or generated within a dark place. Of course, we all come from that place. We might not have any concrete memories of it, but we have prenatal existences. And those 9 months do appear to have some relation. I studied music psychology many years ago, and we discussed a lot the research about playing music to your children in the womb. There are certain things that can, of course, influence a child's possibly personality as they grow up. One major thing is, of course, one thing that's undoubtable is children hear their mothers, and across cultures, women do sing to their children in a certain way. We all have this kind of, is it called vocalese? I can't quite remember the word, but there's a word for the way mums speak to their children, how we all speak to children in ways that's really, really easy to understand and very comforting, and a kind of way of cradling the child in our voices. So, long story short, we all know what it's like to be in the womb. Not meaning to put it in, not knowledge that we can maybe put into words, but we have all been there. So that's why this card could represent a rediscovery of this world, perhaps better put in a symbolic way. I mentioned before in a few of these videos, but I believe that the symbolic sort of chakra, the energies area around the I guess the belly, is a source of great comfort for particularly mercurial people like myself, people who maybe not find it difficult to concentrate, but people who are always running around in their heads and being very sort of mercenary and finding little texts, crows, taking little bits and bobs and putting them together and finding it difficult to focus on one thing. Spending time in the belly can be really, really helpful for people who are quite quick in their thinking, and it helps them slow down and get to a deeper source. I always feel that this part of the body, if I meditate on it, it feels very blue, feels very calm, very maternal. So a rediscovered unity of the world in its totality. What more place of unity than the womb, than the origin, the seat of creation? So some keywords, second page here, the keywords starting off the the reading, I guess. Realization, soul, world, fullness, success, heroism, genius, holiness, to dance, ecstasy, universal fulfillment, and totality. One thing that's slightly off-putting for me about this card is how big it is. Okay, and so how much it represents universal consciousness, total realization, which sort of leave me feeling a bit cold. Doesn't really excite me to talk about such things unless we're talking about it maybe in terms of art, realizing art and so on, and representations. Seems to be something really vague and slippery about this term, which can be just kind of very superficial representations of some kind of holiness. Say, oh, it's just universal consciousness. No, there's much more to it than that. And I think that's to do, for what makes me excited about this, is the way it relates to fantasy, men's ideas of what women are and how to represent women and the world. It's the same thing in this card. And artworks, similar artworks across culture, both of women vertical and horizontal, whether we praise women as being the Madonna figure or we denigrate them as whores, the Madonna whore complex. This can also bring to mind the philosophical egg mentioned among others in the Turba Philosophorum. The Turba Philosophorum is a text I'm not very familiar with, but it's an Arabic text from around the year 900, which itself is heavily references Greek alchemical texts. So we're getting into a bit of alchemy here, and we're getting into the idea of ovals, of eggs and shapes and creation. This is a really exciting topic. So the Turba Philosophorum is quoted as follows: "The art of alchemy is comparable to the egg, in which 4 things can be found. The shell is the earth, the white is the water, the very fine membrane right beneath the shell is air, the yolk is fire." We don't even need to decompose the elements of the egg to see a great amount of unity, as referenced by the great thinker, the great football enthusiast, and of course a woman who brings a lot of people to the world of cooking and creation. Cooking also a kind of alchemical process. Her name is Delia Smith, familiar to many people based in Britain, of course, probably not so famous outside of the United Kingdom. Delia Smith is a really, really terrific woman, very maternal the way she presents her ideas, and she wrote a wonderful book called How to Cook, and she did something which she was really criticised for doing when she released this book, I think in the 90s. She told people how to boil an egg, because she realised she met enough people who didn't know how to do it. Jamie Oliver discovered this as well. People who were divorced from the prime materials of life couldn't even cook an egg, couldn't even boil an egg. So a useful skill for now, of course, and it's great that people are learning to cook at the moment if they haven't done before. In How to Cook, Delia Smith writes, and I think she writes beautifully and reverently about eggs here. Eggs are, after all, a powerful symbol of something new happening. New life. What's that one? Excuse me, that's the devil. Whoops. Eggs are a powerful symbol of something new happening. New life, a new beginning. But there is another reason. Somehow eggs have become an equally negative symbol. When someone says, oh, I can't even boil an egg, what they're actually saying is, oh, I can't cook at all. So bringing yourself back to the egg brings you this kind of idea of unity, of simplicity, and of God's perfection. Delia Smith is quite a proud Catholic. And she continues, Delia Smith, "A hen's egg, quite simply, is a work of art, a masterpiece of design and construction, with, it has to be said, brilliant packaging." It really is. It's breathable, right? You leave some rosemary by an egg, it will breathe in and absorb the aroma. It is extremely nutritious, filled with life-giving material, vitamins and minerals. It has a delicate yet tough outer shell while providing protection of the glowing life inside. It is at the same time porous, meaning the air can penetrate and allow the growing chick to breathe. It's the amount of air inside the egg that the cook needs to be concerned with. And then she goes on to tell us how to boil an egg. It's really beautiful. And as I said, I think her attitude to eggs are nothing short of reverent. So that's Delia Smith done for today. And a great symbol for what this thing is: the oval shape, the clitoris shape, the vagina shape, or the female sex organ, as well as the egg as well. Great symbol for creation. So the alchemical idea would be the white is the water, the shell is the earth, the very fine membrane right beneath the shell is the air, the yolk is the fire, and we're supposed to have all four elements met in the depictions of the four evangelists, the people who wrote the Gospels of the New Testament, of course. So we saw in the first part of this book how the card is a mirror of the structure of the tarot. So all of the tarot is supposed to be culminating, like the clitoral spot of this whole sequence, the perfect, pleasurable unity is in the world. And it's great that this is pleasurable. This is fun. This is not serious kind of arcane processes. It's a mirror of the structure of the tarot. Four figures frame the woman in the mandala like four basic energies harmoniously united in the service of the same center. In Christian tradition, the angel, the ox, the eagle, and the lion represent the four evangelists. Here, these four elements serve us as the basis for understanding the four suits or symbols of the minor arcana. Jodorowsky doesn't go into great detail here, and just as quick as I can, I'll just quickly list who these four individuals are supposed to be. Not people, but I guess creatures. So we've got Matthew, the angel. Mark is the lion. Luke is the ox, who's the only one to not have a halo. By the way, what's going on in between the ox and the lion? I don't know. They look like strawberries themselves, hence my mug. And then we've got John. John is, of course, the eagle. Have a quick look about eagle eyes. They're amazing. Eagles can spot a rabbit from 3.2 kilometers away. Amazing. Birds are known for their terrific vision, but eagles are something else. Their vision is so magnificent that medieval I don't know, natural philosophers, I guess they were called, so early scientists, believed eagles to be the only animals who could stare at the sun. And that's why he's related to the evangelist Luke. Luke is a bit nuts. Excuse me, John, take that back. John, the last gospel, I would say one of the more entertaining gospels. John has provided food for some of the material for these previous readings with some beautiful mystical symbolic writing in the last gospel, the culmination, the end of the set, 1, 2, 3, 4, as we see in the tarot as well. And why is John the eagle? Well, he does something that we're supposed to do according to certain Christian thinkers, which is to do what Jesus did, to look towards the Father as if we humans were looking towards the Son. We can't, can we? It's not going to do us any good. The fact that 3 million Chinese people do this on a regular basis, apparently, doesn't cover over the fact that this is not good for us. It's symbolic. It's a symbolic idea of reaching, I guess, cheesy example, for the stars, of attempting the impossible, of looking at the direct source of inspiration. You can get a bit close by looking at a candle. Some quite fascinating things happen. But the idea of looking at the sun is a very, very fascinating one. Looking at the source of life. In fact, we sort of look to the sun anyway when we eat. We're kind of eating the sun. We don't photosynthesize. We can't do it. That's why looking at the sun is just clearly a bad idea for us. But we have to have our sun analyzed and processed by other things and synthesized and then brought into our stomachs, which do their own kind of analysis, removing all the synthesis of the sun, of the plants, and then allowing it to be analyzed, to be unweaved. And analien, the Greek word, means to unwind, to unweave something, unravel. So the sun is a direct source of life. State the blindingly obvious, of course, but we can't look at it directly. But the symbolic idea of looking at the sun has been quite inspiring. Thinking of the blazing glory, the roughness of Van Gogh's sunflowers. I painted many, many versions of them. There's been certain cases of madness when people finally succumb to madness when they begin looking at the sun directly. But I'm going to read a bit from a book called Writing by Ear by Clarice Lispector and the Writing by Ear and the Oral Novel by Clarice Lispector. Got her name pronounced wrong there. And it's to do with Van Gogh cutting off his ear and what led him to cut off his ear. And there are theories that it was because he was staring at the sun, or that his inspiration by the sun just got too intense. This probably doesn't stand up to actual biographical reality. It's probably thought Van Gogh cut off his ear because he found out his benefactor, his brother, was finally going to get married, or that he had an argument with that other dude, Gauguin, his painter friend. Doesn't really. WFMU, by the way. Hello, João. Hello, Sheila. WFMU is that wonderful radio station. Their own source of inspiration. You'll be staring at your own kind of oral sun if you listen to WFMU. Based in New Jersey, fantastic station, and really good for keeping part of some kind of network in such desperate times. But enough about WFMU. Van Gogh was theorized, it is theorized that Van Gogh was staring at the sun, and that's why he finally cut off his ear. So I'm going to start reading from Clarice Lispector's Writing by Ear. Exactly what sort of ritual sacrifice did Van Gogh perform in cutting off his ear? Remember, he gave his ear to probably a prostitute after doing this. She calls the police. Bataille responds to this question by proposing an unusual analogy between the amputated ear and the Dutch painter's solar obsession. Solar obsession. A fixation that only becomes more accentuated after this time and finds its most telling expression in Van Gogh's numerous paintings of sunflowers. Our hero, Georges Bataille, is quoted now. Bataille argues it is relatively easy to establish the extent to which Van Gogh's life was dominated by the overwhelming relations he maintained with the sun. Yet this question has never been before raised, and his central argument is as follows, and I'll try and tie this into this in just a second. The relations between this painter, identifying himself successively with fragile candles, with sometimes fresh, sometimes faded sunflowers, and an ideal, of which the sun is the most dazzling form, appear to be analogous to those that men maintained at one time with their gods. Gods being something untouchable, the god being a definition of something that was by definition something you couldn't look at directly. It was beyond not just words, but our even understandings. It was the essential encapsulation of mystery, just like the sun, the most direct but indirect object in our lives, so to speak. At least so long as these gods stupefied them. So men maintained at one time with their gods these analogies, these ideas, these obsessions with divine inspiration, with light. Mutilation normally intervened in these relations as sacrifice. So what is sacrifice? Sacrifice is what, of course, comes from you, like chopping off a limb or giving blood. Maybe creation itself requires a little death, requires a little sacrifice. It would represent the desire to resemble perfectly an ideal term. Ideal. The woman as the world. A fantasy. Generally characterized in mythology as a solar god who tears and rips out his own organs. So, just very quickly quoting from Clarice Lispector again, by establishing this link, Bataille removes Van Gogh's self-mutilation from individual or clinical madness. So you just say someone's mad, you're not really explaining anything at all. What's behind the madness? What's the actual mechanism of that? What's the drive? What's the complex? And instead links it to a tradition or lineage characterized by a certain nobility. For example, the acts of maximum sacrifice and rebellion committed to mythical heroes such as Icarus and Prometheus. This is what it's all about. The ideal of the sun, of staring into the source of creation, is the Icarian ideal. Icarus of course, wants to get to the sun, or at least wants to fly soaring above the capabilities of us mere mortals, of humans. So what happens, of course, in the story of Icarus, Icarus flies too close to the sun, his wings melt because of the wax he uses, and he falls into the sea. Whether or not the world cares about that Bruegel's famous depiction of an ordinary day, farmer walks past, and there happens to be a little splash in the lake. That's another question. Linking this back a little bit to the eagle. The eagle's where, we've got St. John there at the top. For me, it'd be top left or top right. Anyway, I'm getting confused. But St. John is supposed to be a little bit mad and supposed to be, I might be completely wrong here, but supposed to be the author of Revelations. If you've ever read, I don't know how you can get through Revelations. It's amazing, but it's mad. It's very mathematical. There's lots of numerology in Revelations. It's supposed to be written also by John. It's completely nuts. You could say John got sunburnt by divine inspiration while writing it. So there we've got the eagle. The eagle, representing John, is thought to be the only animal capable of looking directly in the sun. And I'm quoting a website called baldeagleinfo.com. I've added the link to the description of this video. Aristotle and Pliny wrote of this and added that the eagle tested its young by facing them to the sun, rejecting any that looked away. Christians adopted this symbolism, comparing the eagle looking into the sun to Christ looking at his Father, and the renewal of the eagle's youth through its plunge into the fountain to the renewal of the soul through baptism. So another idea about the eagle is that when the eagle grows old and his wings they become heavy and his eyes become darkened with a mist, then he goes in search of a fountain, i.e., baptism, new birth, as Jesus mentions in the book of John, particularly in chapter 3. He flies up to the height of heaven, even into the circle of the sun, and there he singes his wings, or he burns his wings, and at the same time evaporates the fog in his eyes in the ray of the sun. So the sun cleanses by burning. There's an essential destruction involved in spiritual rebirth. Then at length taking a header into the fountain, he dips himself there 3 times in it, and instantly he is renewed with a great vigour and plumage and splendour of vision. Creation, destruction, Shiva also being in the Hindu tradition the god of creation and destruction, the dance of which very much resembles the pose or the posture of the Venus or the world in the middle, the woman here. But the idea of cutting oneself for growth, not quite literally, but that giving birth is a painful act. Something's got to give. Some part of you has got to give in order for further growth to happen. So you could see this as the blaze of artistic creation. You could also see it as just true in the natural world. You want to prune the plants, so cut off bits of the plant in order to let it grow. One fantastic example of the revered genre of Portuguese pimba is Portuguese folk music, is As Minhas Bodas by Duo Iliela. This is a duo. I forgot to add a link here, but Duo Iliela are just a popular sort of folk pop duo, more pop than folk, and they call a whole album My Prunings. It seems a little bit, could be sexual in a sense. We talk of sex as a little death, as a little destruction, a little taste of oblivion. After all, the orgasm, I think the orgasm is a big feature in this card as well. Summation, culmination, summit. The orgasm, if it's really an orgasm, should be ecstatic in the strict sense of being out of your body, out of body. So pleasurable that it brings you away from yourself, from traditional or typical attachments to words. It's a rather overwhelming one, isn't it? And I think that's the point. Maybe that's the whole thing about the world, why it's so overwhelming, why it just drenches you in so many themes and ideas and topics, and we've only just talked about one of the corners, only really just talked about the eagle, St. John. So of course I can't deal with the ox, the lion, and the angel, because otherwise this video would go on and on and on and on. But we'll go back to Jodorowsky just to get a little bit of stepping stones mapped out here. Okay. So we'll go back to the evangelists, the four figures. The flesh-coloured animal at the bottom left of the card cannot be clearly identified. Whether horse, ox or bull, it is in any event an animal symbolising offering, aid, sacrifice. Note, there is no halo to this bull. Please look at the image on Google. It's in the description because I'm going to put this card away. We could also consider the point arising above its eye to our left as the single horn of the unicorn, which during the Middle Ages was a symbol of the Virgin's conception of Christ. Here again, this animal would thus symbolise virgin matter, pentacles. Pentacles are the discs in the tarot, the coins. They supposed to represent the material world. And I've got some pentacles just over here. It's very worth having a quick look at what the discs are just quickly in relation to the ox, the bull. The bull is the representation of the coins or the pentacles. There we go. That's the ace of pentacles. And why am I bringing these up now? This is the 2, 4, 6. 6 of pentacles. Beauty or perfection, more like beauty. Well, the pentacles are unusual in the Marseille Tarot because they don't have any numbers on them. The actual numbers are not depicted as they would be in... Have I got another one? Different? No, I don't. But in all the other minor arcana, you see VIII, whatever, meaning 8, of course. So pentacles, unlike the other suits, do not bear any numbers. In this card, material and corporeal energy arrives at its fullness. So it's all about material, physical aspects of life. The body is ephemeral but cleansed of all taint. The body is ephemeral but cleansed of all taint. The realization of material life can be embodied in the figure of the champion who performs an athletic or vital feat. For me, a big goal of... For my mysticism, for my approaches to this whole world, is to re-embody, to rediscover the body and celebrate the physical world. It's not about flying off into the cosmos on some kind of carpet you haven't earned. It's about coming back into the body. But to do that, you need to get out of it. You need to understand or get contact, get in touch with the astral world or with a kind of wider consciousness, possibly. I feel that sounds even too abstract for me. I think it's getting into a world of surrealism, of personal narrative, engaging with maybe the film director in your head who will busily be at the operating table if you just let him or her. So the ox, for me, really represents that re-establishment of the physical. When you get back to the physical, when you, through meditation, sort of lose yourself and then come back to the mechanisms and mechanizations of the body, you realize how absolutely amazing, how miraculous it is just to lift a finger. I mean, who's controlling that? But where did that come from? How does this incredible complexity of this marvelous machinery that I've just inherited this body somehow. I didn't ask for it. That's the absurdity of it all. But in any case, as absurd as life strikes me and as alienated as I feel in a certain sense from having a body, it is quite amazing to have one, to see the pupils dilate and to see just the little stones of the body emerge in the mouth, the teeth and the nails, of course, and the beautiful complexity and the imperfections of the body. The imperfections almost underline how amazing this mechanism is. The other three figures are cosmic elements. The angel represents emotional perfection, holiness, and a heart full of life devoted to giving, which in other words, in the tarot deck is cups, or hearts in the playing deck. The eagle with its halo would symbolize the fulfillment of the mind. Genius that is also a void which cannot be identified in words. So that would be swords. in the tarot. The lion, also bearing a halo, represents the culmination of desiring and creative energy, a sublimation that leads untamed efforts to conscious creation, the figure of the hero who does not hesitate to sacrifice his life. Good. The four energies radiate around this center entirely realized, and inside its blue egg, filled with consciousness and love for the entire universe, the central figure is dancing while looking towards the left. Looking towards the left in the tarot means looking towards your receptive side. The right is supposed to be the active side. This is a whole worrying, typical medieval conception of left and right. Left in French is gauche, and in English, if we say someone is gauche, it means they're socially awkward or inept. The very word for left in Italian is sinistra, which of course is the same word, sinister. There's a huge bias of left and right. The law is known as derecha, right? In many languages, derecha. In Spanish, derecha. In Portuguese, I think I might have got that wrong, but principle is right is might, and the law is just and right. And you, if you're correct, you are right. So this is just the old difficulties and the uncomfortable nature of dealing with these paradigms, because we've got a whole history of punishment for people who were naturally left-handed. If you were left-handed in a school in, say, the 50s, 60s, 70s in England, you might be beaten into using your right hand, for example. But this simply is the presentation of the world as the medieval southern French mind had it. The Marseille tarot is a frozen figure or a fossil of old ideas of the world, left and right, male and female, and it's sometimes really helpful just to dive in and take their word for it, and then therefore dispense with these old ideas later on. The four energies radiate around this center entirely realized, and inside its blue egg, filled with consciousness and a love for the entire universe, the central figure is dancing while looking towards the left, receptivity. Her foot sits on red ground in which 6 furrows have been ploughed, so 6 lines in the ground have been made. Vital activity has been performed with pleasure. The world has been accepted for what it is in full awareness. So we've got 6 lines where the woman's feet are. 6 represents beauty and pleasure. I think we're getting on to the orgasmic part of the world. It's in its awareness. Beneath this soil, barely concealed by a yellow interlace, is a white egg. Here we have the egg again. Beneath this living soul, barely concealed beneath a yellow interlace, is a white egg. This egg, which we could identify as the one of the high priestess, who I have prepared somewhere around here. Where is she? The high priestess is number 2, yet another depiction of females in the tarot. There's a high priestess, the ultimate figure of receptivity and learning potential. There's the high priestess. So we got the egg, of course, to her side. Can you see the white egg? Yes. Burgeoning development. The egg, which we could identify as the one of the high priestess, has been incubated in all its potentialities. When this cosmic egg opens in our spiritual work, we reach the world, the hatching, the bursting through. Orgasm often means swelling. So really, in many languages, it's rooted to this word swelling or burgeoning fruition. This card could represent the anima mundi, the universal agent that is within everything and connects us with everything. The anima mundi is an interesting concept which is surprisingly familiar across cultures. I've written a quote about the anima mundi from Wikipedia, which, according to Plato, is and I've put it in the description. Plato said that the anima mundi, or the spirit of the world, is that the world is indeed a living being, a bit like the idea of Gaia, a much more contemporary idea. The world is indeed a living being endowed with a soul and intelligence. This is like the highest point of spiritual progression, is engaging with the the world's ego, the mind of the world. This idea that there is a kind of consciousness that the world itself has. A single visible living entity containing all other living entities, which by their nature are all related. This could, a little bit, I'm not so sure, but have certain relations with the Ayurvedic idea of prana, which is more of like a bodily energy. Wikipedia references chi in the Taoist and Buddhist traditions. Chi is more related with the body, but then again, we're all part of the world. So, again, I'm really love this book, The Spiritual Teacher in the Cards, The Way of the Tarot, because it is self-referential, and it often places the reader of the book as the reader of the tarot as well, in a way of helping the reader become a reader themselves and maybe a kind of healer for other people. So in a reading, this is the section where we talk about, or where we'll get to, how you could discuss this with someone with a querent, or a querent being the person coming to you for a reading. Of course, the real thing is that the person reads, you're just their mirror. You're not supposed to be interpreting much. You're giving them the tools to read for themselves. But hey ho, in a reading, maybe I shall give myself some life-giving water. Okay, let's keep going. Because it has been placed as the final point and in the position of fulfillment, the world indicates a major realization. It is an accomplished woman, a soul in full joy, a perfect world, a happy marriage, worldly success. So it could represent any kind of culmination. This is a bit of a relief, because we would talk about lots of cosmic abstract things, but it could just be really simple. Okay, you fulfilled something, you've got something done, it could be something really minimal and seemingly facile or minimal or small. So it could be you just complete a piece of work, or you just find a sense of satisfaction in something, satisfaction, pleasure, orgasm. Yes, the vaginal shape, or the clitoral shape, right there. It's sort of so obvious, it's staring us in the face, and it's kind of easy to overlook the almond shape going on. How delightful. The jewel. So there's a certain sweetness, the pleasure to the world. This card can also inspire travel, the discovery of the world in the literal sense of the term. The discovery of the world in a literal sense of the term. Travel, movement, rediscovery as well. Just as Arcanum 16, which is the tower, can evoke the male penis in the process of ejaculating. Don't worry, we'll get to the tower soon. Arcanum 21, or the world, brings to mind a female sex organ inhabited by an exaltation, orgasm, or an individual, a pregnant woman. Despite being rather sexless, here we've got the Rider-Waite-Smith version, possibly the leaves surrounding the woman are the female sex organ, and the woman itself is divine pleasure, the biggest, the sweetest of pleasures, the role that symbolic orgasm plays in all our lives. Potential release. Could be anything. Could be being on the dance floor. Could be performing. Could be finding a flow in whatever it is that you love doing the most. The symbol of orgasm, not literal orgasm. Although we can include, of course, good old lovemaking. So the woman is the pleasure, is the clitoris, is the fulfillment, is the fruition of the process. And the thing surrounding it, the almond shape, is the female sex organ, or more to the point, the male idea of what a female is. The male idea. And the idea, if we have getting right to it, the idea is supposed to be universal consciousness. Like the Word, in the beginning was the Word. In Genesis, in the beginning was the Word. The Word comes from an idea made flesh. On the other hand, if the card appears at the beginning of a reading, it will represent a difficult beginning, so a difficult birth, which has huge consequences. Realization is demanded before any action. Realization is demanded before any action. So consciousness of something is necessary before we move on. That's quite an counterintuitive way of approaching the world. Usually you would have to have your building blocks and then the culmination, but this is the other way around, and how we get into these kind of anti-chronological ideas of mysticism. We're skipping past, present and future here, or everything melts into one once you get hold of the totality of the world, the ego with a capital E, not Freud's ego. We'll come on to Freud in a bit though, but for now, realization is demanded before any action. So this is if the card comes early on in the reading. The card is not in its rightful place and becomes an imprisonment. So a breached birth, a miscarriage. We could then look for traces of the first traumatizing experience in the intrauterine life, or the prenatal life, I guess. Or birth of the person receiving the reading, which has therefore formed an obstacle to future development. If we wish to avoid these kinds of speculations, we will need to take into account the closing evoked by Arcanum 21, placed at the beginning of the spread, and ask ourselves how and why this person is stuck in his or her shell. Shell, egg, and representations. I'm going to spend a lot of time later talking about representations. Presentation, that is redone, representation, representation. So here we go. The world is going to speak, and it's not the longest section here. Unusual for Jodorowsky. And if the world spoke, I am there before you, all around you and inside you, with feelings of immense pleasure. I am a complete being. There is nothing inside me that resists me. Everything is in complete unity. Everything is in its place. I am an invulnerable consciousness with a capital C. I am the perpetual dance of totality. The one who does not know me says no when the entire universe is saying yes. And this negation of my vast acquiescence leads this individual to impotence, or the fear of birth, potentially on the male side. But the one who becomes entirely pure and concave, who allows me to entrance, will begin to dance with me and to say what I say. This individual experiences universal love, complete thought, cosmic desire, and inconceivable life force. If you reach me, which is to say, if you develop me within yourself, you shall taste the supreme happiness that is the happiness of living. To achieve this, you must dissolve within the ardent jewel of my presence. Like 4 rivers running to their single source, leave behind the blind swarm of bees that are your concepts to melt within my bliss. The 4 rivers returning to their single source. The predecessor of this card, is that the right word? The thing that comes before, the precursor? Yeah. Is, of course, the Milan-based Visconti Sforza Tarot deck, which is not as many cards as the current Marseille one, and it was made in Milan in the early 1400s for Maria Filippo Visconti. So the last card, that's the High Priestess, that's the wrong one, but the last card in this deck is still the world, but in the Visconti Sforza, the precursor to this, the world is surrounded by, or is in the company of a city background with nature and a city. Many depictions of the world include these concentric ideas of universe, of the spheres, like Plato's spheres. I think it's Plato's spheres. And it was very important for Maria Filippo Visconti, for whom the tarot was made, the early tarot, to show that the culmination in his world was his city, was his creation, that the world was his city, that It was a kind of display of male splendor. We have created this and we're so strong as a family and my genes will live on. It's interesting that the city is not represented now in the Marseille or in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. That's the Rider-Waite-Smith, and we've got the world here. But it comes from the idea of the city being the culmination of human endeavor, perhaps. Like four rivers returning to their single source, leave behind the blind swarm of bees that are your concepts to melt within my bliss. Leave behind the herd of your feelings to drown within my infinite exaltation. Offer me the demented mob of your desires so they might enrich, like an exquisite delicacy, my constant creativity. And may all your physical matter with all its inescapable needs surrender to this transparency that animates me. You shall then be master of your world. Inside your libido, where are we? Sorry. Excuse me, I've just lost myself. Inside your libido will no longer be in revolt. Your desires will cease to drown you. Your thoughts will not destroy you. Your body will pose no obstacle to your life. You will be full and united to me in dance, joy, and immeasurable celebration. Is this the Christian ideal of heaven on earth, of pulling down divine bliss of paradise? Certainly, many Christians believe it's possible to bring heaven on earth, this sense of eternity to our worldly beings. I am not a big fan of the concept of heaven. I think it can be really risky to earn little tokens in your life so you can gain access to this Willy Wonka factory of divine presence. But there is maybe something in the feeling of eternity of heaven that I can adhere to a little bit. I feel divine, like the deepest of joys to feel in certain sense timeless and eternal. They live in your memory, they burn inside you, like one of those dreams that lives on in you and becomes more and more realized throughout the day. So, among the traditional, I have actually just missed something there. So what Jodorowsky could be suggesting in saying that you shall be master of the world, you will sort of drown in your fulfillment of desires, thoughts won't destroy you, you will be full and united to me in dance, joy, and immeasurable celebration, is quite a frequent theme in potentially anti-Catholic ideas, Protestant ideas, the idea that we can be saved here and now, that we already are saved potentially, that we're not diseased and utterly corrupted human beings, that maybe grace, divine grace, is given to us right now here, and we lose sight of that, but the light is there for us to enjoy, and there's nothing for us to actually do apart from unlearn and unknow all of these corrupting lessons that mainstream religion has taught us. It's an interesting thought anyway, and it's very common across certain Protestant traditions, that we don't need to do any more work. The work is done. We're already held. We're already loved by God. I think I'll just pause there in my interpretation. But among the traditional interpretations, as listed here by Jodorowsky, there's many words he puts here. Sorry, I'm having to close some bits of my browser because it's slowing down here. Good. Among the traditional interpretations, renown, world travel, realization of potential, success, perfect accord, reunion, ideal woman, that's what really excites me, the ideal woman, not my ideal woman, but what men think women are or should be, Madonnas or whores, the Madonna whore complex. Fullness, difficult beginnings, belly of a pregnant woman, or difficult beginnings, singular, belly of a pregnant woman, female sex orgasm, supreme realization, happy outcome, labor, birth. What was my birth like? What was my birth like? Imprisonment, so you're imprisoned in the womb, interesting. Feeling stymied or cut off. Egocentricity, realization of spiritual androgyny, cosmic egg, realization of the four centers, ultimate perfection, the universe reaching its limit, maximal expansion. Through obedience, so this is the world continuing, a couple more paragraphs. Through obedience, I permit your intellect to learn how to be. Through absolute peace, I teach your heart how to love. Through learning reception, I teach your sex how to create. And through acceptance of death, I teach your body how to live. When you have an orgasm, when you're in artistic flow, you are no longer, of course, conscious or thinking exactly what's going on with rational language. You are simply part of maybe the flow of creation itself. You're somehow surfing these waves of ultimate unity. If you ever played music in a collective, you might know what that feels like. Yes. If, like a famished and thirsty lion, you abandon the prey to raise yourself to the soul, you shall finally find me. I am the taste of living and realization. I am the ephemeral flower always being born of the abyss. I represent the materialization of all dreams. Fantasies, that's where we're going next. I represent the materialization of all dreams, the soul without which the world is not the world but a sterile desert, the end of hope. I am the purpose of every path, ineffable joy. Like a holy virgin, I carry the deity inside my womb. I am the concrete expression right here of the sacred energy of the fall, the numberless arcanum. I am the world created by God so that he could love it. I am the world created by God so that he could love it. And just keep this in your heads, because there's just two words to one of these sentences. Oh, I'm so bad at doing this. Ineffable joy, near the bottom there, near where my finger is. Ineffable joy. If the world is in two words, it could be that. There's a long postscript to this reading, and I'm going to start off with the text called Meditations on the Tarot, which was anonymous, but by the, I believe, Russian monk, Catholic monk, who was very curious about Hermeticism, Valentin Tomberg, who writes, the first impression of the card is therefore as if the last major arcanum of the tarot would suggest a conception of the world as rhythmic movement or dance of the female psyche, sustained by means of the orchestral accompaniment of the four primordial instincts, which gives the appearance of a rainbow of colours and forms. Or, in other words, that the world is a work of art. Fascinating. That the world itself is a work of art. Nietzsche thought that we all need to become philosopher poets. It's not good enough just to become poets. It's not just good enough to think about the world, to examine the world. We have to make art out of it and weave those two ideas and disciplines together. What a fascinating idea. The world itself is a work of art, which, according to Jodorowsky, is a world which God created in order to appreciate themselves. I am the world created by God so that he could love it. Sounds very strange. We're getting to the idea of God as creator, in other words, the demiurge. This idea, to continue with Valentin Tomberg in Meditations of the Tarot, this idea of the world as a work of art is portrayed in a most impressive way by Edward Carpenter in his work, The World as a Work of Art. This is tantamount to the thesis that the world is fundamentally neither a mechanism nor an organism, I was going to say orgasm there, nor an organism, nor even a social community. Neither a school on a grand scale nor a pedagogical institution for living beings. But the world, instead of all these ideas that we hitherto have, is a mechanism or it's one entire being. No, it's a work of divine art. At one and the same time, a choreographic, musical, poetic, dramatic work of painting, sculpture, and architecture. The world is within the four frames within which we give it. The origin of the world through a creative act. So he uses the word demiurgic. Demiurge is the creator God. The idea of God as a maker. The demiurgic rearranging of pre-existing matter from a chaotic state into a cosmic state. Thinking of the Big Bang, how things eternally expand and then find form. Where the transformation from primordial chaos into cosmos is intelligible only by analogy with the magical art or the magic of art. I think I might stop there, or maybe a bit more. In other words, we could see the world with its animal, plant, and mineral kingdoms as the variations of a single theme. In other words, mankind, who is the archetype of nature in evolution. Man is therefore the seal, spoken of by Plotinus, and the beings of nature are impartial imprints of him. Walt Whitman wrote in Leaves of Grass that animals give him tokens of himself. Terence McKenna rejected Sartre's idea that nature is mute. That was his whole idea, that nature is us. Is not the world in evolution a world of art, a work of art in creation, where the idea, man, becomes reality? World and work and word are often difficult words for me to teach in my experience of being an English language teacher. Isn't it interesting that in English, world, word, work are so similar? Orgasm and organism all come from that idea of work as well. An orgy means historically like collective work together. What a brilliant idea to take away orgy necessarily from a strict sexual sense. That orgy is collective work together. If you go to, and someone's just mentioned Estrela de Amadora and Atlético Clube de Portugal, the club on the furthest left there. But if you're in the ecstasy of a football match where you're all working together, you're working. It's not just a passive enjoyment. If it was, it wouldn't be that exciting. But you're all focusing on this one aim, this one thing, this one landscape, this whole frame of a football field. I've always thought, how can we bring in 6th League Portuguese football into discussions of Christian Hermeticism? And here we have it. The frame of a pitch, of course, like the frame of a painting, or the frame in which the world is contained, is an arbitrary one. We've invented football, we've invented art, we've invented cave paintings. It's all arbitrary and contrived, but it's our way of reaching this collective orgy meaning collective work, working together on something. Whew. So, to continue getting closer to this orgy of mystical knowledge, we're going to go on to artwork and representation. And this has a strong allegiance to male understanding. I think I'll get straight to it because it's really fascinating for me. Start off with Shakespeare's As You Like It, the very famous speech by Jacques: all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. So we understand that the world is a kind of football game. It's all a game. It's all a kind of divine joke. It's all sort of worked into these four corners, these boundaries that we've invented. It's all symbolic. We're just the players on the stage. We, or they have their exits and their entrances, the players of the stage. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, plays many roles. Well, either the fans, with the referee, the linesman, the striker, the defender, or the person selling hot dogs at half-time. Hot dogs, be fanish. It's not baseball. Last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness. The 7 stages of human life according to Shakespeare. The last scene of all, our elderly life, a life of dementia. That ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. And he uses the French word for without sans. Without, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Oblivion, according to Shakespeare in As You Like It, might just be nothingness. But we already talked yesterday about how nothingness is an impossible thing for humans to perceive, in my opinion. So the mere oblivion of the demented elderly age isn't necessarily a nothingness, a second childishness. Look into the eyes of a newborn baby and they are resonating with something that we can't understand. Their vision of the world is so pure as to be closer to the origin of the world. The origin of the world, or the birth of the world. The birth of the world, or the origin of the world, is Gustave Courbet's painting. I have left a link of this painting in the description. Click on it. You will see, according to a man, in 1866, having finished this portrait, this is the idea of the cosmic unity, cosmic origin, a vagina. Or I should say a female sex organ, if it's going to be really boring and scientific, but the whole thing, not just vagina, not just clitoris, the whole thing, the almond. It blows my mind that this was done in 1866. So, of course, made a lot of repressed male, still to this day, men feel rather uncomfortable. But this is the culmination of centuries of representations of women. Representations because there's an idea a man has had of a woman and then presented it again in physical form, giving birth to this idea. We've also got Woman with a Parrot, which is a similar nude, more obviously, in a sense, more obviously erotic because it's got symbolism, whereas the birth of the world, the origin of the world, is so blatant. Curiously, Courbet almost certainly painted the whole of the woman because there has been a rediscovery of the head of the woman, and then is likely to have cut out the head and just almost by cutting out the head and the rest of the body and just focusing on the legs and the vagina, the belly, has focused the origin within the actual almond, the petal or the jewel of the female reproductive organ. I hate saying female reproductive organ, but I don't want to say vagina because that's just one part of this whole organ. I could call it jewel or petal. That would be a nicer way of talking about it. And it brings to mind all sorts of male representations of women. Venus, the origin and the origin of the world in the Tower, of course. The second or third artwork I mentioned in the description is Edouard Manet's Olympia, which is much more obviously seductive in a more traditional sense. Yet there are traditional things going on in the background. There's a dog, which is supposed to symbolize loyalty, and then there appears to be a servant and a child in the background of this painting, ruffling through drawers. Again, please look at these images. They're in the description. I'm just listing a few of them. The one that actually really comes to mind is The Simpsons' depiction of the Venus de Milo. Yes. Episode 9, I think, of season 5 is called The Last Temptation of Homer, where Homer... I can't believe this is happening. Homer is tempted to start a relationship with Mindy, who works at the office. And there's another episode that has a really interesting parallel with this, which is exactly the same number, episode 9, but of season 6, where Homer falls in love with sugar and sweets and is falsely accused of harassing a woman. But in episode 9 of season 5, Homer is tempted to cheat on Marge, and he doesn't, of course. But there's a moment when Homer is fantasizing about her in the office, sort of falling asleep at his desk. I don't know what he's doing. And he sees Mindy emerging into a landscape of the Venus de Milo in a clamshell. Lenny and Carl, his friends and his colleagues, are the angels. And Carl says, "What's wrong, Homo? You ain't never seen a sexy lady in a clam before?" And it's that sort of frame, the dream world of a woman in a clam as well being a very sort of vaginal kind of food or animal itself. The lips, of course, the shape, making it difficult for certain people to eat. Also representing essential life minerals, clams. How do you say, crustaceans in general, very, very popular as food. Mankind have always been eating this thing, and we all come from this blueness, the warmth of the ocean. Humans are supposed to come from the ocean, of course. But what really strictly interests me is the presentation of this all. I love the tarot for what it is and for the structures it puts up and the way it helps you spin a narrative and understand the world. Don't see it as a divination tool, divinatory tool. It's all about, for me, it's a fascinating artwork. And if that might seem a little bit cold because maybe we should be predicting the future, no, this is just my warmth towards this amazing tradition. And brings to mind any kind of things what do we value so much in art? What's so high up there? The Venus de Milo, one of the most famous statues, the armless woman, and the Mona Lisa. They're all vertical presentations of women. They're less sexual. The Mona Lisa is far from sexual, less sexual than a horizontal woman as depicted in the 19th century realist art or mannerist art earlier of the 16th century Italy. And this brings me to the problem of presentation of women, of course, either as virgins, angels, dutiful servants for men and for families, and the kind of silent thing that keeps society together, the nurturing idea of a woman, and the idea of a whore, a slut. Why on earth is it we say, oh, prostitutes, a very noble job because it's the first career, the first job that ever came about? I'm not saying prostitution isn't a noble job. My problem is when people try to somehow appear self-righteous and very aware of their feminist ideals by saying, yes, the oldest job in the book, prostitution. Well, that's just clearly, even if it's true, not helpful. Midwives, nurses, healers, why prostitution has to come first, that bothers me. It represents a problem in psychoanalytic theory is when a man can only consider a woman either as a Madonna or a whore, and this leads to really problematic parts of someone's life. So women seem to have had a problem in men's lives, in the lives of our artwork, of occupying both positions or being in the middle. Being in the middle of that dialectic. Why can't women just be both? What's the problem? Mainstream religion, probably. And here we come to the realm of fantasy. So there is a theory by Jacques Lacan, which I'm not going to pretend to have any expertise on. I've just read about Lacan in this theory of the little other object. I'm going to call it the little other object, which Lacan called the objet petit a. And for me, the objet petit a is the eternally other object, the object that is always beyond comprehension, and a source of desire because it is beyond comprehension, because it is always distant. Maybe I'll start off with a quote by Slavoj Žižek, which is, again, in the description. He talks about the beginnings and the endings, the emergence of something and the loss of something, this coincidence now from The Plague of Fantasies, which is a book by Žižek. Žižek writes, this coincidence of emergence and loss, of course, designates the fundamental paradox of the Lacanian objet petit a, which emerges as being lost. not being, well, it could be being lost in the world, not having a map, but being dash lost, being hyphen lost. So the objet petit a is exactly this idea of a woman which is constantly escaping us, this fear of the vagina, this fear of this part of the woman's anatomy being this idea of void, nothingness, which itself is impossible to encapsulate in words. The idea is that the objet a is not an actual object we once possessed, but then lost. The very moment it emerges, it does so as a lost object. So the female ideal is constantly disappearing over the horizon. It's some kind of unknowing that men both are attracted to and repulsed by. Why else would men persecute women for so, and still do, for such a long time? Why is patriarchal society more common than matriarchal society, at least as I'm aware of it? The very moment this object of desire emerges, it is lost. This is its trick. We never really had a perfect drive satisfaction, which Zizek calls jouissance. I can't pronounce it. Jouissance. But we retroactively produce this illusion as soon as restrictions are placed on the pleasure, on the jouissance we had at our mother's body, which he calls das Ding. So possibly we know, we understand this pleasure, and we are thrown out, ejected from this comforting world, and we're forever trying, as men, to get back to this. By the way, I'm mentioning men and women. Everything I'm saying here could apply to women's ideas of the world as well, considering that women could have absorbed these ideas of women themselves and be representing them as well. And in his other sort of cosmic idea, spiritual idea, that we all have aspects of the androgynous in us and of the other sex as well. So when I say men, I sort of also mean the concept of men, the idea of men. These restrictions, continuing with Zizek, these restrictions retroactively produced what they forbid. Thus, both law and objet petit a, the result of the law's installation in the child's mind, have paradoxical origins. The law creates objet petit a as the little concentrated reserve of pleasure or jouissance left over in the original jouissance we had to sacrifice in order to become socialized subjects. From what I gather, that means is we create laws in ourselves in order to get away from the one muscle mass of erogenous pleasure as a baby, in order to become members of the society ego with a little e. The point is that this little remainder is not something we ever actually had in some kind of pre-linguistic, pre-Oedipal bliss. I'm aware it may appear we're going very, very far away from the petal, the erogenous mass of the orgasmic world, but hear me out. I feel the idea, the fantasy here is always disappearing, as I said, over the horizon. And Lacan's idea of the objet petit a, the little other object, is this pure expression of otherness that we're somehow bizarrely attracted to. And it also relates to things, just things in general, concrete things. Heidegger also talks a lot about how we can be alienated and we can come closer to things and become being itself, Dasein, their being. But I like this attempt by Lacan and Zizek to distill otherness into one concept that's always evading definition. So how do objects relate to us? How do they speak to us? How might they know us better than we know ourselves? And in Lacan, we have objects and we have fantasy completely combined in the whole sphere, the whole petal of desire itself. There's more written on this by a wonderful writer who uses the pseudonym The Dangerous Maybe, and I've put more quotes of it in the description. I think we're coming towards the end now of this slippery, mysterious idea of women's desire. And I just put 2 links of songs right at the end of the description here, which to me really feel like the world. They're sort of very ethereal, ambient songs, quite androgynous sounding, in some way. I don't know how to put it. But why don't we end on music? That the art form closest to the idea, the muses, the things that give us ideas, the muses is, of course, music, the artwork of the muses. So what better way to celebrate the world of the world? In fact, that's what we're looking at within the framework. This is the world of the world. This is a representation of the world. Of course, it's not exactly the world itself. If we knew what the world was, maybe we wouldn't have to bother doing all of these strange, arbitrary things with cards and so on. So the two songs, one of them is by the techno producer Hieroglyphic Being, aka Jamal Moss from Chicago. His song is called Awake and Energize. The whole album that comes from is very good for walking around. I had to stuff it in my ears a few times walking around a gallery when I was being a bit distracted. It's also really good for meditating as well. I don't really suggest meditating with music, but if you have to do it, if there's some really annoying noise or something, this is a very good one to do it with. My teacher once said to me, you don't need incense, you don't need music for meditation, you just need the basics. 4 walls, ceiling, inside, and that's it. Sometimes though, you do get distracted in noises. So this album can be really helpful. Hieroglyphic Beings, The Red Notes, I think it's called The Red Notes. She said, you don't need incense. You are the incense. Then we got something by El Voag, which is, I think, again, another pseudonym from a man who was in a band called The Homosexuals. And this song is called Bedroom. And it sounds really... The singing is very high and very angelic. And there's something painful but also deeply beautiful at the same time with this song. All right, enjoy those. I haven't decided what we'll do tomorrow. Any suggestions, keep them coming. I would love to crack on with Blaise Pascal, a bit of Zizek, maybe more Simon Reynolds. But do get in touch. I've got to, but thank you for all those. And I'm sending you all little kisses, beijinhos from my room here. Not in Alcantara, not in Belém, neither is it in Oxford, but those 3 flags representing the source of divine bliss, of course, the football field. Thank you all for embarking on the fast-moving Ghost Caboose, and I will see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Thank you very much.